everyone, to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption and infertility. Today we're going to be talking about interstate adoption, how to adopt a child or a baby in another state. This is a topic we get a lot of questions on, as you can imagine, and I think you're really going to enjoy this show. I'm Dawn Davenport. I am the director of Creating a Family. We are the National Adoption and Infertility Education and Support nonprofit, and you can find us online at creatingafamily.org. One of the many things we do here at Creating a Family is create resources, and we create about 4 resources every week. One of the resources we have that I think you will really enjoy is a multimedia guide on how to choose an adoption agency or an adoption attorney. We put a lot of time and effort into this guide, thinking about all the things that you could possibly want to know about how to choose. We have lists of questions to ask. We have warning signs to be aware of. We've got advice from both experts, and the real experts probably are the adoptive parents, and we've included their advice in there as well. I think you will enjoy this guide, and to get to it, you go to our website, creatingafamily.org. Go to, on the horizontal menu, hover over the word resources, and click on eGuides, and it will take you right there. The Creating a Family radio show is underwritten by our corporate sponsor, Ferring Pharmaceutical. Ferring has recently launched a new product called My Fertility Navigator. I guess it's not a product, it's really a website. My Fertility Navigator. They offer free one-on-one support for women who are struggling to become pregnant and are unsure of where or how to begin their fertility journey. Once you enroll in the Navigator program, you will receive a personalized guidance in the form of a dedicated navigator, a fertility navigator, who can help provide important information to you on nearby fertility centers, information about financial, how to afford it, and just talking to you about their different options, treatment options that are available. You can get more information by going to their website, myfertilitynav.com/CAF. I'll give that to you again, myfertilitynav.com/CAF, and make sure you put the CAF because that's how they know that we sent you there. This show, as well as all the resources provided by Creating a Family, could not and would not happen without the generous support from our gold sponsors who believe in our mission of providing unbiased education and support to those struggling to create a family. Some of our wonderful gold sponsors include Children's House International. They are a nonprofit, Hague-accredited international adoption agency with programs in 13 countries. They provide full service, including home studies, in states of Florida, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Texas, Utah, and Washington State. And they place children with any U.S.-approved family worldwide. We also have MLJ Adoptions. They are a nonprofit, Hague-accredited adoption agency serving families across the U.S. who are interested in growing their family through international adoption. They also offer home study services to residents of Indiana. And last but not least, Hopscotch Adoptions. They are a Hague-accredited adoption agency placing waiting children from around the world, offering home study and post-adoption services to residents of North Carolina and New York. In addition to those gold sponsors, we also have many other sponsors whose generosity allows us to bring you this show. We ask that when choosing an adoption or an infertility service provider, please choose one from the Creating a Family directories, which you can find on the service provider page of our website. You can search by location, services provided, types of adoption, anyway, a whole host of factors that we think are important when choosing. And by using these directories, you support those who support us. Today we're going to be talking about interstate adoption, which is the same thing as adopting across state lines. Yes, it is possible, but yes, there are different things that you have to do when you are adopting across state lines and things you need to be concerned about and need to think about. Our guest today is Suzanne Nichols. She is an adoption attorney with over 25 years of experience in private domestic adoptions. She is also now involved in reproductive law in the areas of surrogacy and donor egg. She is licensed in both New York and New Jersey. This is a re-airing of a show that we did several years ago. This is a topic that continues to come up. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about adopting across state lines, and I think that this show is worthy of you listening to, again, if you've listened to it once, because you'll still get something out of it. And for a lot of people who didn't hear it the first time around, I am so happy to be able to bring it to you again. Enjoy. Welcome, Suzanne, to Creating a Family.
Hello.
One of the possible distinctions between families choosing to adopt through an adoption attorney or an adoption agency is that, as a general rule, most adoption attorneys expect the adoptive parents to do more to find an expectant woman who wants to place her child for adoption. And with adoption agency, it varies really considerably as to how much they expect the adoptive family to do to find the prospective birth parent and how much they're going to do. But anyway, almost all agencies and all attorneys, adoption attorneys, welcome and encourage adoptive families to do as much outreach and advertising as possible, if for no other reason than it usually shortens the waiting time. So how do families go about finding an expectant woman who might want to place her child? I guess one of the first things we usually say is use your personal contacts, but how do you suggest people do that?
Well, I don't personally believe in sending out random letters to doctors or clergy people or friends. Well, if they were friends, they wouldn't be random. But obviously. But there are people who, feel that way. But I think every physician, every attorney knows someone who wants to adopt. So I think if you're going to reach out to the community, you should be reaching out to people in the health professions who you know already, or if you know any family law attorneys, things like that. Personally, I don't find it productive to just write random letters to attorneys with your background information or to physicians. But I think it's certainly, if you have a priest, a rabbi, a clergyman that knows you, I think it's a good idea to let them know, as well as professionals in the health field and law that you know personally.
In specific, anyone in the health field that I guess if you know anyone, you should start networking. If you know, even if your aunt is a cardiologist, would it be logical then to contact her and say, do you happen to know? I would assume that gynecologists and pediatricians would be the more logical people to approach. But what if you don't know a gynecologist or a pediatrician, but you know a cardiologist?
I think that's a great idea. I think I have had clients in the past who have a relative who's a nurse who learns of a pregnant woman. It depends on how open you want to be, Dawn. Some people tell all of their friends because someone may know someone who knows someone who, is seeking to make an adoption plan. But I think sometimes that's hard to just tell the whole world at large because everyone tries to be so helpful, but when you run into an acquaintance and they're going, so tell me, that can be hard for some people. For some people, it's great. But I think anyone who works at a hospital, has any connection with a hospital, anyone in the health field is likely to know of someone who wants to make an adoption plan.
There is that fine balance, and for some people it isn't much of a balance at all. They weigh between privacy and openness, they weigh it and say, the more people who know, the better, and they send out to their Christmas list, so to speak, or their holiday list, or whatever. They send it to everyone they know. But for other people, that is such an invasion. They feel like it's such an invasion of their privacy. So for those people, you're suggesting, as I hear, be selective as to who you tell. So, but then that has the downside of once you tell one person, it will usually get around. But on the other hand, you still maintain some level of privacy.
I agree. That's a very personal decision, how many people you want to tell.
Yeah.
Whether you want the world at large to know.
Do you recommend that they mail their actual adoptive parent profile or just the information that they're seeking to adopt?
Well, I think if you know the person, if you're speaking to your gynecologist, your pediatrician, a nurse, I think you can let them know that you have this material ready to send to any young woman who is seeking to make an adoption plan. I find that most people, a doctor's not going to want to have that at his or her office. I think you should just make it known that you have information about yourself, about your family, that you would present to a pregnant woman. But I don't think you necessarily need to give it out to all these people. I think a lot of that ends up in the trash, to tell you the truth.
What about making up business-type cards to hand out to people you might meet that you think might be able, that you hadn't anticipated, but that you, or even, I guess, somebody that you are anticipating, like your doctor. Do you think that's helpful?
Personally, no. But having said that, this is every law office, every agency handles things slightly differently. And I don't advise my clients to do that. I don't. But I know other attorneys do. It's just a very
Why do you recommend against it?
I think it's a waste of time. I think if it makes you feel as if you're doing something, look, almost weekly I receive unsolicited letters from people around the country who are telling me their story and asking if I know of any birth moms. Well, first of all, that's not something I can do as a New York attorney, match clients. But if I could, I have my own clientele. So
right.
I think it's difficult to I think most of those things just end up in the trash. Personally, I can't think of any client that I've ever had who has located a birth mother through sending out random letters, although I have had clients locate a pregnant woman through speaking with professionals who they know personally.
Yeah,
so
I mean, how do people in your practice, and you've been doing it for a very long time, what is the typical way that your clients, if there is a typical way, or if you could just rate the top 3 ways that people find an expectant woman who may be considering adoption plan?
Right. Well, clearly the top way is through a very aggressive advertising approach. That's probably how, if I had to make a guess, 90 to 95% of my clients locate a birth mom through advertising in targeted states.
Okay, we're going to come back to that, but give me the other 2 because I don't want to leave our listeners hanging, and then I'm going to come back and have a lot of questions about advertising.
I don't know that I'm trying to think if there are 2 others. The other way that people locate a birth mom is through a contact, someone who they know who knows someone. So through networking. That certainly can work. It's just not the fastest and most effective way, but I'm not suggesting that people not do that. And other than that, through advertising and through networking. But I honestly, in over 20 years of practicing, can't recall one client who located a birth mother through a random letter.
Yeah, and by random, what I hear you saying is you don't know this person. You just go through some website that gives you a list of family law practitioners and are sending it to everyone in your state or everyone,
Exactly.
And it's a mass mailing to people whom you don't know. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Now let's go back to talking a little about advertising. Now we've already talked I guess networking could be considered informal advertising.
Sure.
But in this case, and we're going to switch to what we're, more formal advertising. This is not something you normally associate with the word advertising. Do you get that a lot when people are first thinking about this?
I used to get that a lot, but now that I have clients, I have married couples who met each other through ads and advertising. Now that we're in a totally different world than we were 20-some years ago, I don't find that people are surprised by advertising. What, of course, they need assistance with is how much advertising to do, where to advertise, things like that. But years ago, I used to have people who were shocked when they would hear about advertising. But advertising is the way families seem to be created these days.
Okay, so you mentioned the how much and the where. Let's start with the where. Where should people advertise?
Well, adoption laws vary state to state. There's no uniform adoption law, so I wouldn't recommend that anyone place ads without speaking to an attorney first and getting some advice as to what states are best as far as the laws are concerned to advertise in. after that, most of my clients are doing print advertising, although internet is coming into play now. I do have clients who are advertising on the internet, but most of them are advertising in daily newspapers, thrifty nickels, giveaways, print, as much print work as possible.
I got a wonderful question from Tracy, and it's one that I hadn't thought of, and one that I didn't know the answer to. So, Tracy, you win a prize here. I don't know what the prize would be. An Attagirl, that's what you get. And this is her question. Some states allow advertising for private adoption, and some states do not. How does advertising on the internet apply? For example, if you want to post an ad on Facebook, if it's not legal to advertise in your state, does that mean you can't advertise on the internet?
Well, that, of course, is a very good question, and I hesitate. I'm not trying to avoid it, but I hesitate to answer it definitively because I don't want to give out any type of legal advice that someone could misconstrue over the phone. You can do targeted internet advertising, so it doesn't have to be something that can just appear in every state. But some states, as you just stated, don't allow advertising, whether it's print or internet, but sometimes someone in one of those states, it's perfectly fine for them to advertise in another state. But this is something that you really have to talk about with an attorney. So for example,
give me an example.
In Florida, it's illegal for prospective adoptive parents to place ads in newspapers in Florida. The only people who can correctly place adoption ads in Florida newspapers are attorneys who are licensed to practice in Florida or agencies that are licensed in Florida. But a Florida resident could place an ad in another state where it is legal to advertise. They could locate a birth mom out of Florida. Does that clarify?
Yes, and I will reiterate what you said, and that, Tracy, but your state, Tracy, might have a different law. Do you know of any state that precludes parents from advertising at all anywhere?
I don't. Offhand, but don't take that as the gospel. But I'm not aware of any state where someone from a state such as Florida couldn't advertise in if it was legal in that state.
Let's do a quick plug right now about how to find an attorney that specializes in adoption. I know you're going to say the same thing. We've already got this information on our site, but I want you to say it because we just mentioned that somebody needs to contact an attorney. But quite frankly, they need to contact an attorney that is qualified to talk about adoption and stays current on adoption law. So how might somebody find that, Suzanne?
Well, the first thing that I would do is check with the American Academy of Adoption Attorneys. Mm-hmm. They have a website, and these are all attorneys. You can't just join by paying a fee. These are all attorneys who have been vetted and have years and years of experience as adoption attorneys. Mm-hmm. And each state, we have members in each state, so that's one way to start to get some names of experience. We
include a link to that, and there is the ability on that to go to your state, and all the attorneys that are members of QADA, American Academy of Adoption Attorneys, are listed there with their contact information. Now, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted. I just wanted to get in.
No, that's great. Also, after that, I would definitely get references and speak with friends who have adopted and make sure that, they were happy with the services. I mean, here is someplace that networking is really important. You certainly want to have several references as to the experience that the family had with the attorney, but the first step would be to be certain that the attorney is not just a family law attorney, but someone who is experienced in adoption. And there are people who hold themselves out as experienced adoption attorneys who are not. They may have done a step parent adoption, or they may have handled one or two adoptions over the years, but that does not make them an expert. And especially if you are seeking to do an interstate adoption, you must work with someone who has done interstate adoptions, who has contacts with attorneys in other states, who has the experience.
And we're going to come to the second half of this show. We will be talking about just that thing. You said that one of the things that when you talked to people about advertising was where, and we talked about that. You also said how much. So how much should people advertise? Is it truly that the more the more you advertise, the better? The more you advertise, the quicker you will find a child? Is there a direct correlation?
Well, I do tell clients it's a numbers game. There's no question about that. So if someone is spending a few $100s a month on ads, they would expect to get fewer calls than someone who's spending a few $1,000s on ads. Now, every attorney has a different philosophy on advertising. There are attorneys who recommend that their clients spend a few $100s a month on ads, call forward to their cell phones to receive the calls. I don't believe in that. I take a very aggressive approach to the advertising. So I typically advise my clients to do a 2-week blitz of advertising. And by that I mean they spend several $1,000s on 2 weeks of advertising, and they stay home or stay at a landline for almost 3 weeks during the advertising period, because cell phones, although I love them and couldn't live without them at this point, they are not as secure as a landline and getting a call. So I take a very aggressive approach. It's work. There's no question about it. It's hard work, but that's a much faster way to locate a birth mom than just a few $100s a month in advertising and going about your life.
Do you find that are there places, in fact I know there are, what about some of the places that are online for adoptive parents to post their profile? Do you see much success in your clients with people who place on those websites? And then can you name a few if you've seen any success?
I haven't. I really haven't. There are so many hundreds of profiles. I mean, I'm sure there are people who have had success like that. But again, I just haven't seen it. I mean, when you're placing ads that are specific to you and someone is answering an ad, there's something in the ad that made them connect with you, and they call and they talk to you and can start to develop a rapport with you. They have a voice, a connection. I find it's just so much more effective.
How do you know, are there some states that are better for you to target your advertising, either because they have better laws, whatever that means, adoption laws, or and what would we mean by a better law, or if there is a greater acceptance of making an adoption plan in certain states? How do you know what state to place your ads in, or should you just stick with your own state?
Well, I definitely don't think you need to just stick with your own state. That would be really limiting your possibilities. This is something that needs to be run by an attorney when you're choosing your states, because, as we said, some states have laws that are better than others. And by that, I mean some states have laws that are better than others for adoptive parents. I'm representing adoptive parents. Some states have laws that are very friendly to both the birth parents as well as the adoptive parents. Some states allow support very early on in the pregnancy. It's totally legal, so you may find that you have a much more expensive adoption, and many people have a limited budget, so they may not want to advertise in a state that would allow support from the very beginning of the pregnancy through, because if a birth mom needs that, it's legal, and they may not be in a position to do that, to help her in that way.
And also some states allow different expenses to be covered, and and in some states a lot is allowed. Therefore, again, from a monetary standpoint, it could get pretty expensive. Yeah.
Right. That's that's the point I was trying to make on that. Some states, as you mentioned, it's just more commonplace for women. It's not frowned upon for a woman to be making an adoption plan. I think it's still more difficult in the Northeast for women to be making an adoption plan and let friends and family and coworkers know. And there are other parts of the country, for whatever reason, that it's very common.
What parts of the country do you find it, and I know you're speaking in generalities here, and that's fine, just generally, what parts of the country or states tend to be more accepting of expectant women placing their kids for adoption?
Well, I find it's very common in different parts of Texas, different parts of Illinois. I find that in New York, and Massachusetts, the Northeast, it's less commonplace. So a birth mom may be more uncomfortable. A pregnant woman may be more uncomfortable in making an adoption plan and letting people know about it.
What about in the? We hear sometimes in the Southeast, the southern states. What do you find about as far as as a general rule, southeastern states or southern states, I guess?
It's not uncommon there either. I mean, and also in the West, I find it's not uncomfortable for women many times in Washington and Oregon. Yeah, probably the place where it's most unusual is the Northeast.
Yeah, I've heard
Although
that as well.
it's done, but it's it's more difficult, I think, for women.
Yeah, and I think that whether or not there is a societal acceptance does influence how people who are facing an unplanned pregnancy and are not certain of their best approach and what's best for them and what's best for their child. It is harder if there's not societal, because you're fighting that as well. You are listening to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption and infertility. Today we're talking about domestic adoption, how to find a child and how to adopt across state lines. Our guest is adoption attorney Suzanne B. Nichols, with over 24 years' experience in private domestic adoption and recently experience with reproductive law in the areas of surrogacy and donor egg. Now, I love the idea of creating a website and including the URL on any of your ads, or your if you're going to do cards, or if you're going to send out letters to the people you know. What do you think about the idea of a website? And if you are in favor of it, what should people put on the website?
Well, I'm seeing that happen more and more right now. For a long time, the reason why I didn't think it would work was because the women, unfortunately, who are making adoption plans today are doing this because of financial reasons. So many times they can't keep their cell phones going. They don't have internet access. But I'm seeing that now women are able to access the internet more regularly on their phones. So the internet, I am recommending expanding to the internet. I would say the website, if you were going to do a website, should be very simple, nothing, overly elaborate. Maybe have a few photos and some basic information about yourselves, and certainly contact information, not only through the internet, but through the telephone.
Can you say that again, because you believe in the that person-to-person contact is so important?
I do. Yeah. I do. I think it, takes you over the edge if someone is considering two families, and one is open to chatting with her, and just the sound of the voice and being able to easily ask questions and feel the warmth. I think it's much easier than through email and internet or anything like that. I think it's a bonus to have that contact.
Yes. Here's a question from Lexi. I have heard of people taking out a billboard letting the world know they want to adopt. This sounds a little crazy, but I thought I'd get you and your guest's opinion.
Well, you probably can tell that I'm not in favor. You get enough weirdos just when you are putting your telephone number in an ad. I can't even imagine what a billboard would bring in, and the cost of it, I would assume, would be quite expensive. And I don't know how someone could afford to have multiple billboards in different states. I would think the cost would be prohibitive.
Well, and I was going to point out, one of the things you have to do when you're thinking about advertising is you are weighing the cost versus how many prospective birth parents will be seeing it. And the problem with a billboard is, as you point out, it's not cheap. And how many people are going to be driving by that location who are going to be in that place or know somebody very close to them who is in that place where they're having to make this decision? And is that the most effective way? And, what roads do you put it on? Where do you put it? All those things. It just seems to me that it's I guess if money is no object, what the heck? But, this would be a good time for me to mention that we have done shows as well as we have extensive resources on how to, including videos, on how to prevent yourself from being scammed or the subject of an adoption fraud perpetrated by a fake birth mother. It's a real concern, and as Suzanne, as you mentioned, when you put your phone number out there, you do open yourself up to a certain amount of this, and we have a lot of resources. You can find it under adoption resources, under adoption fraud or adoption scam. Do you save money, Suzanne, by finding a potential birth mother on your own? Let me read a question we got from Amber. She said, we have adopted 2 sons through a private agency where we were matched with their birth mothers. Each one of those adoptions required a home study, etc. We had our friend's daughter want us to adopt her child when she gave birth last year. To our surprise, the process to legally adopt her baby was going to cost us the same amount as it did for the boys. We could not come up with the money. Is there a way that is significantly financially cheaper to adopt a baby? I was surprised that here we had a woman that wanted us to raise her baby, but to legalize everything was outrageously expensive.
Well, that's interesting. If you are locating a birth mother through an interpersonal connection, as is it Amber was doing?
Amber. Amber.
Yes, I would. You wouldn't have any of the advertising costs. So that would be a huge reduction in overall costs. But
I would think, and if you're using an agency, most agencies do charge us significantly, especially if you are coming to them with the birth mother, and so for them the agency has no advertising. The agency has counseling fees. Or in the adoption attorney the same way but the parents would pay for counseling, and for the legal paperwork. But again, no advertising. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm not sure. I would need more information on that, but certainly whether you locate a woman through advertising or through networking, the legal fees to petition the court for the adoptive parents and the legal fees for the birth mom, or maybe she's in a state that requires agency, those would probably be the same. There's not going to be a reduction in legal fees, and perhaps this woman didn't have medical coverage, so maybe the costs were so large because they were going to be responsible for her medical costs.
Oh, well, I hadn't thought about that. Okay.
Perhaps she needed a large amount of financial assistance, and it was legal in that state to give her. So I'm just, presuming all these things. I don't know, but that's, if you don't have advertising, I tell my clients that's a tremendous savings. I'm not sure how it ended up to be the same.
And I would have thought that most agencies, who also would have to be doing significant, if she lives in a state that required an agency, would also be saving money. And most of them, I would have assumed, would have given in fact, I know of many who do give a discount for somebody coming in where the agency itself has less to do.
Exactly. So I'm not sure why that happened. Maybe it was the medicals. Because
I mean, I think that so the answer to the question of do you save money by finding a potential birth parent on your own, I guess the answer is it depends on how much it costs you to find the birth mother,
right.
Or the potential birth mother. Now, we talked about that if you limit yourself just to the state where you live, you are certainly limiting yourself unless you live in one of the states that you've mentioned that were quite open in societal acceptance of making an adoption plan. But for others, you're limiting yourself significantly to the number of prospective matches you might have. Therefore, it makes sense to cast your net wider and outside of your state. But how do you adopt a child? Let's say you find a birth mother that lives in a state that's across the country or just either or next door, either one. How do you then process the adoption? I know that there is the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children, which is a uniform law that many, if not all, states have adopted that sets procedures for the transfer of children from one state to another. So how does this apply to adoption?
Okay, well, it's really two questions that you just presented me with.
Sorry about that.
The first part was, I live in New York and I've located a birth mom, let's say in Pennsylvania, for example. How do I process that? Well, you would need to have an attorney in your home state, and the pregnant woman, the birth mom, would need to have an attorney in her state to represent her. And now with Pennsylvania and New York, if the adoptive parents live in New York, they have no choice as to what law is going to apply, because in Pennsylvania they would need to be a resident to file there. So your attorneys need to know this information, of course, which is why I said it's so important if you're doing an interstate adoption to have an attorney who's familiar with this. Sometimes you can locate a birth mom in a state such as Texas that will take jurisdiction of the case, and you can finalize your adoption in Texas simply because your birth mom lives there. So sometimes your attorney will have a choice of law as to where to finalize the adoption, and sometimes we do not have a choice. So first of all, you need to have an attorney who knows that part, and then in order to bring your baby home, then we have to comply with the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children. And this is a law that regulates the transport of children across state lines in an adoption. So your attorneys need to know how to properly file Interstate Compact after the baby's born. And typically it will take a pat answer, a standard answer is that the adopting family, when they are going out of state to pick up their baby, they will have to remain there from anywhere from 7 to 10 business days. Most of the time they get clearance before that, earlier, but it can take 7 to 10 business days if you run into Monday holidays, or the way Christmas and New Year's fell this year. They both fell on Saturdays, and government offices were closed Friday, and many people took off Monday. So it depends, but it's typically 7 to 10 business days. While you are waiting for approval, you can travel with your baby anywhere you want within the state where your baby was born, but the baby cannot cross state lines until you have approval. So it was a two-part question.
That was a trick. I was trying to trick you out.
Trick question, yeah.
And so as far as where you finalize the adoption, that depends on the law of the state where the baby is born, or the law of the state where the adoptive parents live?
It depends. Sometimes you have a choice of law. That's what I was trying to explain. You don't always have a choice of law, but sometimes your attorney may say to you, look, your baby's born in Kansas. Kansas will take jurisdiction of the case. The laws will be such and such. We can finalize in Kansas, or we can finalize in your home state. Or sometimes, depending upon where the baby's born, the attorney, for example, Arizona won't let out-of-state residents finalize. So if you locate a baby in Arizona and you don't live in Arizona, you're going to finalize in the state of the adoptive parents.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, and so we know that it takes roughly anywhere between 7 to 10 business days, and during that period of time, adoptive parents, do they have custody of the child?
They should. They should.
Okay. So they'll be either in a hotel or staying with friends or family if they're lucky enough to have friends and family.
Exactly.
In that state. So they're either in a hotel or renting if they can find an apartment or a homestay type of place, hotel, whatever. That's where they are. What if the state you live in limits something about adoption? Let's say advertising or what expenses for the birth mother you're allowed to pay. But these limits differ from the limits set by the state where the birth mother lives and where the child is born. Which state limits apply?
Well, that's a tricky question, Dawn.
Well, I didn't say this was going to be easy.
It depends.
Let me guess, you're going to start your answer with, it depends.
It depends. Some of these questions, a question like this, it's like a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous, so it's hard. I don't want anyone to mishear what I'm saying. But
okay. Let's start with a disclaimer which says that everything here is very general and it's not specific to your case, and you need to contact an attorney that can look at the specifics of your case and the laws of the state where you live. So just take this as general educational purposes only.
Okay, that's correct. So that is important, but typically the state in which you're finalizing would apply. I've had some instances over the years where even though we're finalizing in a particular state and the expenses are allowable and perfectly legitimate in that state, Interstate Compact won't approve it, or, you run into these bureaucratic challenges. But typically, generally speaking, you would be going by the law of the state where the adoption is going to be finalized.
And as you pointed out earlier, that may or may not be the state where the baby is born.
Yes, exactly.
You need to find that out. Well, how would you work it out? Let's say that you are getting ready to advertise in pick any state. Do you need to, it seems like there's a potential quagmire out there that you are doing something that your state says is okay, or maybe your state says no, but you're advertising for whatever, let's say expenses, birth mother's expenses, but the state where you're advertising allows it. But are you potentially going to impact getting your child back into your state if it doesn't comply with the laws of your state? And do you need to figure that out before you even select a state with which to advertise in? I know that was a very roundabout question, but
yeah, I like to work that out with my clients before they place ads. I don't like my clients to just randomly place ads in states. I want to talk to them about the potential the areas that we could run into problems with, and so I want to target the advertising. Having said that, I will say that there is an element that cannot be controlled here. I've had it over the years where my clients pick states where the laws are very favorable for everyone. They're very good laws. They place the ads there. An aunt, an uncle, a cousin sees the ad and sends it to their pregnant friend or relative in a state that we would never have advertised in, and connects the birth parents and the prospective adoptive parents, and of course they love each other, and then we have to work it out. The lawyers have to work it out, but sometimes it's not as easy as we would have liked.
Does it ever make sense? Would it just be easier if the expectant woman is either willing or even maybe prefers it, to bring her to your state to give birth?
I almost never advise that. First of all, some courts would consider that forum shopping and would be opposed to you relocating a birth mom just to take advantage of your state's laws. So one has to be careful of that. Also, it can increase the cost of your case tremendously because a birth mom may have Medicaid in the state in which she lives, But if she's relocating to another state just to give birth, and really it would be fraud for her to apply for Medicaid there and say that she was going to be a permanent resident of there, so you may have uncovered medicals. You need to house her somehow, so you'd have to get an apartment or a hotel in the state where you're relocating her. She may have a lease in the state where she was coming from and need help with that expense. And most of the time, women have connections, family that they don't want to leave just for the pregnancy. They may have other children.
Yeah, and so one of the things I always say when faced with this issue is that you're also potentially removing her from her support network.
Exactly.
At a time when she might need it more than ever.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's something to, Do you need to hire an attorney in each state? I think you've answered that. Yes. Does the adoptive parent need to have an attorney in both states? I know that the birth parent, the birth parent needs to have, or parents need to have an attorney in their state. The adoptive parents need to have an attorney in their home state. But
correct.
Do the adoptive parents also need to hire an attorney to represent their interest in the state where the child will be born?
Only if they're finalizing in that state. They may need co-counsel. And birth parents can, in certain states, can decline to have their own representation. I always prefer that they have their own representation and not use the same attorney as the adoptive parents who would be finalizing there. So I don't like the dual representation. I prefer that everyone has their own attorney. On certain occasions, depending, an adoptive family may need to hire counsel in the birth mom state. But it's not always.
Does adopting out-of-state cost more than adopting in-state because of the added time and the work?
Not necessarily. I mean, the way if you have to travel out of state, your plane fare, car fare, that would add on to the cost of the adoption. But sometimes if you live in Long Island and you locate a birth mom upstate New York, you're still going to have to travel, have to stay somewhere for a little bit. I mean, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. It depends. It doesn't necessarily add on to the cost.
Well, and I think it could, but one of the other things is it also depends so much. It depends on how much of the living expenses you're paying.
Yes.
And that it may be that you are in a state that you have found an expectant woman in a state that limits that somewhat. Therefore, it could actually save you money from that standpoint.
Very good
and
point.
Of course, medical costs are a huge issue. So, and that can play. That's a matter of that's not dependent on what state you're in. So, yeah. We received a question that's not directly on point, but I think it is such an important question. And it deals with who can help you find a child. I guess it actually is on point to a certain extent because we're talking about finding a child, and we've been talking some about, exclusively so far, about what the adoptive parents can do to help either their attorney or their agency or do it on their own, find an expectant woman. But you can also potentially hire somebody, and these go by different names. But let me read the question. This is from Michelle.
Sure.
How do you determine what is a facilitator? They use different names. And how do you determine if they are legal in your state to use? First of all, let's break that question down just a minute. What are facilitators, and what are the names do they use?
Okay, well, facilitators, in certain states, facilitators are legal.
What
in other
states?
States, I wouldn't be able to, I don't have a list. They're illegal in New York, so we cannot use facilitators in New York. I do believe that it is legal to use a facilitator in California.
That's the only state I know of, but I also don't know. That's the only state I know of, and it's the one that's most often touted as where it is legal. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. It may, again, I know that there are facilitators in other states. That doesn't mean that People call themselves adoption consultants. There are so many different names, but basically what a facilitator is doing is charging typically a large sum of money to get you some names of supposedly pregnant women. And I say supposedly pregnant women because they don't necessarily give you the name of someone where they have proof of pregnancy on. So facilitators place ads in newspapers, get calls, and then basically they're not doing screening. And in most states, I don't know if any state, even in California, licenses facilitators. So these may be people who have previously adopted themselves and feel, I can do this, I can make money on this, this is a way for me to earn a living. I mean, you can probably tell I'm rather negative about facilitators. In New York, a facilitator is a quote-unquote dirty word. No one would want to be referred to as a facilitator because, of course, it's illegal. So even if they were legal in my state, I don't. There's a lot of money at risk, and this is work that you would, in my opinion, would be better spent on doing your own advertising and having your attorney or yourself screen the cases, because they're just basically, in my opinion, preying on people in many instances. They're not really providing any service that you couldn't do yourself. And
well, let me ask a question. Would it be?
Sure.
I can understand the scenario where somebody is, doesn't know the first thing about advertising, doesn't either have the time or is intimidated by the whole process of figuring out where to place ads and how do you write an ad and what's what looks good and how do you arrange it in such a way and what pictures should you use and if you're going to use pictures at all and all of this stuff just seems totally overwhelming, so that they might want to hire somebody to aid them in the process, to write up their ads, to select their what states, or if your attorney or your agency may be helping you figure out that, but could help you figure out where in the state. I mean, is that a facilitator?
Well, let me just try and answer that by saying, first of all, choosing your states as to where to place your ads is legal advice. So you should be working with your attorney or your agency to do that, not a facilitator who is, sometimes they're practicing law without a license. That's what they can be accused of. So you have to be very careful on that. Many times facilitators understandably don't know the law in the state in which you reside, so they don't know that you may need an agency, a licensed agent, an agency that's licensed to place into your state. I mean, you just run into trouble. So all of the services that you've just described, such as advising as to what states to place your ads in, helping to write an ad, advising you as to how to prepare your profile, advising you as to how to write an ad, these are all things that I do for my clients. People come into an attorney and they don't know where to begin. They typically, even if it's their second adoption, the laws may have changed, times have changed. I mean, 24 years ago, we weren't helping our clients to prepare profiles. Clients would get a call and write a little note to the birth mom. 25 years ago, people didn't have cell phones that they could make calls on. It was just a totally different world. So things are constantly changing, and I think that these are all services that you should expect your agency or attorney to help you with. These are services that your agency or your attorney should be providing for you. You should not need a facilitator. A facilitator has no education in the field. They're a facilitator. They've made themselves an expert.
And the other word that they can sometimes go by from what you're saying is an adoption consultant.
I've heard all different kinds of things. Sometimes I've heard them say, I'm just a mom who's adopted, and I help people, but for a fee.
All right. Well, I think a lot of people who are listening to this show are thinking in terms of waiting times. What can I do to decrease the amount of time I wait? And certainly I would assume from what you have said throughout this interview that aggressive advertising is certainly one thing that you can do to lessen the amount of time, as a general rule, that you might wait. But another thing that we stress to people is that a greater degree of flexibility on the type of child or conditions your child might have or might have been exposed to will also likely shorten your wait. Do you see that in your practice as well?
I do, but I have a little bit of an issue with that because I feel that I'm in no position to tell someone what type of child they should bring into their family. So I think it's really important for people to be honest with themselves, and if they're not going to love a biracial child as much as a child of their own race, then they should wait on that. I feel really strongly about that, Dawn. It's not something that you trade up to. Not everyone can handle a child with certain disabilities or certain races. So, yes, of course, the more open you are to race and possibly disabilities, the faster your adoption can happen. But it's so important for the child as well as your family to be sure that you are totally comfortable with any of these possibilities. I mean, in my opinion, the fastest way to bring a child into your home to shorten the wait is to spend the time up front with the screening and the advertising. When people say, I can't stay at a landline, maybe someone else can be at a landline for you. You can call forward one landline to another to limit as much of the luck involved in the search for the birth mom as possible. So I think the time that you take up front to do it is so important, and it makes your success happen that much quicker.
And let me reiterate, I stress the very same thing. I want to stress that I agree wholeheartedly. Do not say, I worry that when people get in the mode, I just want a child as fast as possible, and don't think through that adoption is a quick act, not necessarily quick, but it's a one-time act, but parenting is a lifetime act, and you need to make certain that this child is the best child for your family, and quite frankly, and perhaps more important, that you are the best parents for this child. So we never want people to say, I will take a child that's been exposed to alcohol throughout the pregnancy just because I want a child, but I'm not prepared yet to raise that child, or somebody who's willing to take a biracial child, or a full African American child, but hasn't thought through the issues of as a family becoming a biracial or a family. And I worry a lot about. You need to be prepared for raising this child, not just getting this child. So on that cautionary note, let me thank you, Suzanne Nichols, for being our guest today on Creating a Family. To get more information on Suzanne, you can, of course, go to our service provider page, and since she practices both adoption law and reproductive law, she's listed on both the infertility and adoption database. But you can also get more information by going directly to her website, which is rlnlaw.com. That is rlnlaw.com. This show will be archived on the 2011 Big List at the radio page of creatingafamily.org, and it's also available for a download as a podcast from iTunes. The easiest way to find it on iTunes is to use the iTunes button on the radio page, although, of course, you can go directly to the iTunes website and find it there. To stay in touch with the latest developments in infertility or adoption, as well as receiving the upcoming week's blog and show topic, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter at creatingafamily.org. And next week's show, which will be March 9th, will be on raising a child that has been sexually abused or that you suspect has been sexually abused. So join us for that. The UN estimates that there are 143 million orphans in the world, including 130,000 currently available for adoption in the U.S. foster system. These kids, as well as the millions of older kids throughout the world, deserve a home. To get more information about U.S. kids waiting for a family, go to the adoption resource page of creatingafamily.org, where we include links to various photo listings of some of these kids. Thanks for joining us today, and I will see you next week.
Let's say you just bought a house. Bad news is, you're one step closer to becoming your parents. You'll proudly mow the lawn. Ask if anybody noticed you mowed the lawn. Tell people to stay off the lawn. Compare it to your neighbor's lawn. And complain about having to mow the lawn again. Good news is, it's easy to bundle home and auto through Progressive and save on your car insurance, which, of course, will go right into the lawn. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and other insurers. Discount not available in all states or situations.